Greetings and salutations, all you freaky folks out there on the glorious tubes of you, and welcome to a somewhat different edition of Disinformed After Dark. I'm Shane.
And I'm Michael.
Indeed. We're down to Michael today, but that was, tragedy. He slipped off of his stool. He needed to go and fix something.
Down to Michael, or he's going down? Hello?
Yes. Well, when you're not wearing pants and you're on something that's that slippery, you're going to hurt yourself one way or the other. But I digress. If you're unfamiliar, obviously, we want to introduce ourselves. We are two of the hosts of the ever increasingly popular Disinformed podcast. We have a weekly show where we like to delve into random esoterica, and in the course of explaining it, we lie. It's a lot of fun. And you can check that out on your preferred podcast provider app. And don't mind me while I'm adjusting my tailbone. But we were in the midst of having an offline conversation, and I thought, why the heck not? We're always happy to give you all a little content, and if we're enjoying one another's company, you can dive in as well. But we were having a little discussion about Metallica and the current state of affairs and what is happening with the group. And I'm in the context of thinking about the dynamic of the group once Jason got into it, because he was given a really raw deal, as you have this sort of famed member with Cliff Burton that was sort of adored by the fan base, really appreciated. So one, you have people automatically dealing with kind of the tragedy of having lost this vital component that was a really big sort of catalyst for things happening, particularly on stage. And so to get to be the new guy that gets brought into that mix,
and the manner in which he died, like a tour bus, like hard to be more impactful to the remaining band members than something like that, given it could have easily been any one of them.
Exactly.
And very little time for grieving before they're just like, hit the road again, keep on touring. And now we got Jason Newsted coming in.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I agree. He was given a bit of a raw deal there, because it was shoes that you could not hope to fill. Like, you know, first of all, Cliff was an insanely gifted talent and one of the founding members. But also, you know, when this happened, they were all quite young still. And the manner in which he died was so traumatic that, like, nobody, regardless of who they were, go in there and just, like, make everybody forget about Cliff. No matter what you're going to do, you're going to be compared to Cliff. And you're going to be the brunt of their healing from the remaining band members as they try to deal with their trauma or not deal with it.
It's like anybody trying to be the guitar player for Ozzy Osbourne. Once you lose, Randy, you're going, okay, well, this impossible shoes to fill. And regardless,
they got
of
the perfect man for it, though, because he was a genuine fan and brought so much energy. And so I liken it to when Cliff died, Metallica lost their heart. When Jason left, they lost their soul, because he really was like the soul of the band during that time. Like, you look at any of those live performances, and he's the one just bringing it to all the, all on stage with all the energy. And then, Lars and James and everybody always talks about how, he'd be the first one there and the last one to leave. Like, they'd all be gone, he'd still be there signing autographs and dealing with the fans and stuff, right? So he really did bring a lot to it that I think they could not have asked for a better person to fill that role. And had it been anybody else, I think the band wouldn't have survived.
Right. And I think that is another component, I think, where I talked about how I kind of have the nostalgia gleam over the top of Saint Anger in particular, because of how attached I was to Some Kind of Monster, and seeing how they recalibrated and then bring Robert in, who somebody, as I've mentioned, I appreciated because of his Jerry Cantrell days and sort of a time with Ozzy as well, and kind of going all over the place. So interesting process to watch them incorporate somebody, have another finger-style bassist again, in how as that expands, but a lot of fun musically speaking.
Yeah, it's what's interesting to me is, like, and part of it is just having grown older and being less attached to the music, although obviously you and I have been talking about it a lot just because they've come out with a recent album, but being kind of less attached to it than I was as a teenager, of course, when you're in your more formative years. But part of it is also, like, and what I'm talking about here is the phenomenon that, like, Rob now is the longest tenured bass player of the band, right? He's been there longer than anybody else. And yet, to me, mentally, he still feels like the new guy.
Yep.
And part of it, like I said, is just that, you know, Jason was the band member there during the formative years. And then of course Cliff, long gone before I became a fan, but you know, the bass player for like those 3 powerhouse albums that everybody loves, right? And then part of it's also just like, yes, Rob's been there the longest in terms of years, but he's only had what, 3 albums, right? Because he wasn't on, so he's had Death Magnetic, Hardwired, and now 72 Seasons. So like up until last month, he'd only been on 2 albums.
Yeah, which is just incredible. But I mean, it also speaks to the volume of touring that they had been doing, which gets into what do you think about the concept of the current touring as constructed, where they're trying to play different tunes every night and trying to make the set list unique, play less venues, have, you know, fewer dates, but try to make it a little more impactful and meaningful for the crowds that show there because they get a unique show.
Well, 40 some odd years into their career, I think it's not just for the fans. I think it's partially for them too, right? Like, you know, as it is, no matter what show they're doing, they have what, 4 or 5 must play songs, right?
Right.
Like they gotta play Sandman. They have to play Sad But True, or, you know, whatever. There's a few songs there that are just like, you have to play them.
Right.
So, and what I love about Metallica is you go on their website, and they have, for every single song, they've got a counter for how many it's been played, and its first performance and its most recent performance. And you can click on like some of these guys and it's like thousands, right?
Well, plus like thinking about the new resurgence after the Stranger Things tie in with having Master of Puppets get this whole brand new life bled back into it as well. Like it's a whole new generation of folks finding Metallica for the first time, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, so I think, to answer your question, I think it's great for the fans. I think it's phenomenal because you're not, if you've, especially a band that's been around so long, that a lot of the longtime fans have probably seen them several times, right? So you're not just getting a regurgitated, you know, show that you've already seen. You're getting it mixed up in something fresh, even if you are still seeing some of the same tunes get played. What I also still find interesting is, like I said, going on their website, having, you know, play counts for every song. There are still songs that have never been played. And that is shocking to me, just because you would figure at some point, given just how the Metallica machine and how much they tour, that at some point every song would have at least gotten a play.
Right.
And then even some songs that have gotten plays that would just, you would naturally think would have gotten something. So like, for instance, Fixer has only ever been played once and just got played like last year or something, like a year or two ago.
Yep.
And that's a phenomenal song that came out 25 plus years ago.
Yep.
And then to reference Saint Anger there, my favorite song on that album, well, one of 2, is The Unnamed Feeling. And that's a great song. And I especially think nowadays with the way they play it, you know, you could really modify that and make it such a kick-ass tune to play live, I think.
I feel, you know, what's funny thinking about that, where we were just talking about like the musician's perspective versus a listener perspective. And to me, I'm like, some of the things when James has to do lower register, particularly if they were things that he was heavy with it on in the studio, they don't seem to like to do live, because I feel like tonally when you get excited, your voice goes up in register, funnily enough. So if you're lethargic, your voice drops. So it's easier to actually start singing with a higher pitch. You actually tend to go, you're not going to go flat if you're excited. So you're going to start pitching up the other direction. So if you're trying to get down into lower register, like my new career as a Peter Steele impersonator, going out on tour, it's actually a little more difficult to do, and you will start to, I notice if he starts to lose pitch at all, if he starts getting wobbly, it's when he starts trying to sing in a lower register. So songs like, you know, some of the older, like I don't imagine you're going to hear Mama Said a lot on tour either, even though that does fall in occasionally. Seems like that's what he skews away from, but total tributary of thought that I followed and didn't talk about it, but it would make sense to me. Well,
no, and that could be the case of, since you brought it up with regards to like The Unnamed Feeling, maybe that's why they're not doing it. Although yes, I will say
it's definitely in that range.
Yeah, but I would counter that with one of the criticisms, you know, be it justified or not, of Saint Anger, aside from the drum talk, is James's vocals not being quite up to snuff. And so I think a modern, especially given how solid his vocals are for 72 seasons, even if he did it in a completely different spin, because obviously I'm sure they would mix it up. They'd probably add a solo to Unnamed Feeling or whatever, right? Just like they did with All Within My Hands. But I'm pretty sure no matter how he chose to sing it now, he'd probably be an improvement over.
Well, so, and then, talking shop again, just to devolve yet again, they actually tend to detune when they go on tour as well. So they're going to be going down in register even further than they normally would be. So if they're playing that song, now granted, they might stay in the same keys. If they were playing in C at the time, they might just stay and loiter there. But even then, it's like if they do drop and they're going down further, it's like, oh God, now I have to. It's just going to be a little bit different. You can't Roy Orbison every night.
No, truth be told, you might be shedding some light because, like, as we talked about pre-roll here, I, not being a musician, I'm just a layman, right? So I'm familiar with the names of musical notes, but I do not have an ear for it. I couldn't tell you what an F sharp is or from an A or whatever, right? So to me, I'm just like, that's a great song. I can't believe they've only played it twice live, and they were both like within the span of like 5 months back when the album first dropped, right? And I'm like, that's probably one of the 2 best songs on Saint Anger. I'm surprised they don't relive that, and like bring some new light to that and stuff. And you're coming at it from a perspective of like, well, let me show you what's under the kitchen sink here, and like how the sausage is made. Yeah. And it's like, oh, you know what? That's probably it, because I'm sure there's got to be a good reason for it.
There is weird rationale to the way set lists get constructed, just depending upon band, because it's iterative. It changes depending upon who the personalities are. Sometimes it's like it's just a pain in the ass to play, or we didn't play it often enough, or it wasn't popular, or there's you have these conversations amongst the band yourselves as you're putting set lists together, even when you're not famous. It's just things that, oh, I feel more comfortable doing this, or God, we've played that to death. Can I just do something different?
Well, I know with regards to his voice, like we just talked about Fixer having only ever been played once, and that performance, his vocals are a little shaky on it. And then he talked about after the fact that he, I guess he was sick or had some issue or whatever. So he was pretty dissatisfied with his performance on that song.
And it'll sour you quickly. Yeah,
exactly. And if it's the first time you've ever played it in 25 plus years, chances are you're not going to revisit it, because it's like, oh, the one time we played it, I didn't do so great. I don't want to do that again.
Yep. Let's put the baby to bed.
Yeah. So that's probably the one time anybody will ever hear that song live for like the 40th or whatever anniversary. And now it's gone forever.
It's one of the things I really love, not to veer wildly afield what we're talking about, but things I love about Coheed and Cambria, where they have like the Never Ender series that they do, where they basically go through and play every album, front to back, and ensure that they do that live. And they have the DVD CD box set that I've got sitting behind me here that I have listened to recently, where it's just a lot of fun to watch them. And they do have a couple moments on some of the earlier songs, particularly like Second Stage Turbine Blade stuff that they had not played, and it shows because there's obvious rust and Claudio doesn't quite remember what he's singing. And then if it's something where they had different, depending upon how much time passed, his singing voice changed in between albums, and he was singing a lot higher then, which is laughable in context. But so some of the stuff is very different.
Well, everybody's got to change it. Like Bono doesn't sing Bloody Sunday like he did when he was 25 or whatever, right? You just can't hit those.
Particularly when you get older, you just start to lose some of that fidelity, and your range starts to kind of lessen, particularly if you've abused your voice a lot, which is why Bob Dylan sounds like Tom Waits these days. You just, and
why Axl sounds the way he does.
Oh, dear God. We won't even touch on that. But just so fascinating stuff when we get into it. And before we get off of the call, I'm sorry, did you have something else you were going to run with?
No, I was just going to mention one other thing is with regards to, well, I guess any band, but like in particular Metallica there, I will say that it's a bit of a hats off to them in terms of like, I guess after everything they went through in the early 2000s, the ego death, right? Because these are like some of the world's biggest rock stars, but still somewhat like humble, I think, in some aspects there. Like, I think James, especially when you listen to some of the lyrics that he writes, but also the way he like tackles some of the vocal performances or thinks about it, even after the fact, like if I was one of the world's biggest rock stars and I had a lackluster performance of a song, I wouldn't even care, right? But then he's like disappointed with it and thinking about it, and it's just like, that's fascinating. Also, if I was a musician at all, if I ever wrote a single song, I would play every single song I ever wrote live. It would get at least a play some point. So the fact that they could have like, yeah, they're only like 11 albums in or whatever it is, but the fact that they
Only.
can, well, but I mean over the course of 42
Yes,
years,
right.
To have a bunch of songs that they've never played live is mind blowing to me. Just because I'm like, I can't, again, a layman, not a musician at all, but I could not fathom taking the time to like write a song and craft it and like, you know, like it's my baby and, you know, bring it into life on this album and then never play it. And then it's just done, gone forever, right? Like that's so surreal to me that like if I wrote songs, if I wrote an album, every one of those songs would get played at least once.
Well, see, and the funny thing is you have interesting emotional connectivity to this material. So it might be something that you wrote about somebody or with somebody or in circumstances that you don't necessarily want to go back and relive. There's a lot of any number of reasons that could factor into why you would avoid that. I was thinking about this as I was looking through. I've been snagging the Genesis back catalog, and I was looking at it as I was uploading material, and I'm like, there was a string in post Peter Gabriel, right when they started moving into being kind of a trio for a bit. Like they were putting out an album a year, and this isn't like, you know, one or two songs. This is like between 9 and 10 tracks, maybe even 12 depending. And these are like, it's progressive rock stuff. There's a lot of folk, heavy instrumentation. Like they wrote a lot of very immersive material with a lot of moving parts, and I was like, they were putting an album out a year with all of that. Drives me insane. And then you think, okay, well, if you're that prolific, you're never going to be able to fit all of that stuff into a set. You know, eventually, once you accumulate the hits that people want to hear, things like some of those things just kind of have to fall by the wayside by attrition as well. And maybe, you know, you work it in from time to time if you can, but you know, if you don't play something frequently, you do start to kind of lose your fidelity with it as well. But
well,
just,
that's true.
Interesting.
That's true when you're talking about like being that prolific. That's a very good point. But if you're taking, you know, 6-7 years in between albums and touring like crazy, that's where I kind of like, I think I could squeeze in the song at least once or twice here and there, you know. But no, that's a good point. I also like miss some of those, you know, early days of like rock and roll, where you could just have like this proliferation of music where these bands were cranking out, you know, album after album of always like, you know, really good or diverse material. And I think that's partially a reflection of the times then versus the times now, is that, you know, back then you release an album and, you know, the only way people could really like express their feedback on it is like, you know, the critics themselves, right? Like writing articles. You didn't have the easy, like I couldn't drop an album online and then within 5 minutes read 2,000 comments about what they thought about my song.
Well, and also the industry has changed so dramatically, not to get granular and go off on that as well, but it's like back in the day, that's how you made money, is you sold albums. And, you know, touring was a component of making the money, and largely you were touring to promote the album, to ensure people bought the album. Whereas these days, there are so many ways to monetize material if you've got a decent scheme in place. And yet, you know, the successful folks can use that where, yes, let's make a music video for every, like that's floored me that Metallica has a video for every song on 72 Seasons.
I think they did for Hardwire too.
Yeah, where it's just, you know, the sheer monolithic monetary explosion to get to that point. You're like, okay, cool. Well, if you can afford to do it, great. Why the heck not? Because it gets it more exposure and more people are going to run. But there's a lot better ways to merchandise material. You know, but these days it's like if you can't sell albums and the money's not going to come in that way, you got to do the touring, you got to sell merch.
Well, that's why they're the machine that they are. Because I mean, like you think about it, like 11 albums or whatever is not a lot for a 42-year career,
particularly if they're pirating it.
Well, especially when you think like how the backlash that Load and Reload got and Saint Anger got. So right off the bat, you're like, well, there's 3 albums that are like kind of not very well.
The Napster backlash on top of that, and all the other.
And so it's like, so when you're thinking about it, you're like, well, there's like 5, and then like, you know, 5 of the original kind of main albums, you know, up until the Black, you know, and then they kind of wildly different. It's just like, people's thoughts on them, whether or not they sold out and they're crappy now or whatever, right? At the time. But it's just for them to be this machine that can afford, videos for every song, and just this mega, like probably the most, I mean, I don't know the stats, but I would imagine that they're one of the most lucrative rock bands currently in existence.
Presumably, right?
Yeah, and just to be that off of 11 or whatever albums, however many albums there are, especially when some of them are not exactly well revered, it just goes to show you the power of touring, like you're talking about. Because although they, kind of stingy on the album drops, they have been just a touring monster.
Well, plus you get S&M on top of that, and you're paying money out for Garage Incorporated because you're sharing that with the people that originally wrote the material. Yeah, you can get granular with this, but fascinating subject as always, and glad we can chat Metallica from time to time. The one thing I will also point out, which it occurs to me because I'm seeing it behind my head here as it is in frame, that to my shoulder here where my finger is pointing, you will notice that there is a novelization. Michael Mann just wrote a sequel to the film Heat, and the novelization is, of course, Heat 2, but it has got some prequel. I don't know if have you seen the film Heat?
I've never seen the film Heat.
Oh,
who's in it?
Well, that is the very famed Al Pacino and Robert De Niro vehicle.
Didn't Robert? Yeah, I think I just read about it because, like, I know Robert De Niro is currently in the news, isn't he? Because he's like 79 years old and just had a kid.
Right. So it's in my top 5 films. It is routinely cited as one of the greatest heist films of all time. Real phenomenal tour de force performances, great cast. Michael Mann's one of my favorite directors, so it works really well. I'd recommend checking it out. It is on Netflix, I believe. You can scope it for free there.
Yeah, good. I'll have to take a look. And I'm still looking for Casino. I finally saw a little clip of it because somebody uploaded something about, like, showing what's his face? Oh, the actor's
Joe Pesci,
leaving like a courtroom or something like that, and like crossing a street, and then they like juxtapose that with the actual footage that existed from the guy doing that, and it's like, oh, having no background in it, I'm like, Joe Pesci was a perfect guy to cast for that because he looks just like the guy.
Yep.
But that was like the little bit I finally seen a Casino, and I was like, that's cool. Want to see the film, still can't find it.
Well, if I were able to, I would send you the disc cross. This is why I still have physical media. I don't like to play around with this.
My stepdad, big proponent of it too. He literally has walls of DVDs. The guy owns thousands.
Yeah. It's I had this with we were discussing this about, like, Dogma at one point was just kind of in a weird lay-by where you couldn't find it anywhere. So unless you had a physical copy of it, like, it was just lost to the ether for a while they were still working out between the dreaded Weinstein Company and Miramax and what became Disney, like, who owns this stuff. So fascinating. But in any event, returning to the sequel book, if for those of you out here who do love Heat and are into it, the book is fantastic. I finished it in 3 days, absolutely tore through it.
It's an older book or relatively
new? Nope, relatively new. Just came out. So it goes into some sequelization of the film and some prequel storytelling of the film that talks about De Niro's sort of cadre of thieves and some jobs that they pulled prior to the movie happening. Mann is really heavy with research. He's kind of like a Michael Crichton-esque director, as he really has like full reams of backstory for all the characters, plays very Tarantino with it. And so there was a plethora of research that he had done going into writing the film that kind of carries over, that gets flown into the novel. Really fantastic. So if you enjoy the movie once you see it, the book is also there in the offing as well to check out, but I absolutely adored it. So for fans of that, go check it out. That's what I'd been reading recently before returning to my Stephen King deluge.
No, yeah, I'll definitely check out the film. I really want to get back into reading. Like, I picked it up, some of the Stephen King stuff after you guys had your book club on it and stuff. It's just so hard to get the time for it now. Like, it's so much, often by 8, 9 o'clock, I'm like ready to go to bed. I'm just exhausted after the day with the little one and work and all that.
Eight Jobs does that to a person, I find.
And even when, like, I've got a little bit left, it's like, sometimes honestly, even just the thought of like sitting and watching television is like tiring, where I'm just like, you know what, I'm gonna go to bed.
No brain power.
And yeah, and I'll just like, I'll put on a podcast, and maybe I'll listen to an episode or two before I go to sleep, and that'll be nice. And then usually in the morning I have to replay the episode while I'm working, because I've fully anticipated, like, it's 8:15 here, it's so early, I'll go and I'll lay down, this like episode's an hour and a half, that'll finish 9:45, perfect, that's a good time to go to sleep. And then 5 minutes into the episode, I'm out like a light, and then the episode just plays, even though the episode's still playing in the ear. It's like I'm solidly asleep to it.
Well, you assimilate it to a certain extent in a somnambular state, maybe.
Yeah, so I do want to get back into reading, though. I got to charge up the Kindle, and I bought a ton of books when I got on a brief little kick where I was like, let me just gobble all this stuff up that I'm going to read. And so I got all this stuff, and so it's sitting there waiting to be scooped up, but here we are.
Admittedly, I have the luxury of being able to, I was afforded the time to sit and read, so I'm taking full advantage of it while I have it.
Oh, bless you, sir. You should. Like, it's well-deserved break.
And I can say that on top of that as I look down, I realized I hadn't anticipated we were going to jump on for an after dark, and then I'm tired in the way that I am. Given the recent discussion about folks abhorring certain folks, fandoms and associated material, I will say I purchased this shirt long before the turf debacle began, and I like the way I look in blue. So damn it, I'm gonna wear the shirt. That's just it. It is what it is. But
I saw the shirt at the start, and when we were gonna sign on for it, I was gonna briefly say, like, did you want to, sure you want to do an after? But then I was like, you know what, I don't want to be that guy, so I wasn't gonna say anything.
At this point, like I said, I've already on this very program here on the Tubes of You said that it's one of those things where I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater at this point, and I look good in blue. I'm just going to wear the damn shirt.
No, you do look good in blue. My shirt under my sweater is a very similar shade of blue, and I'll just say that if you obviously
lovely color with pale skin, yeah.
Well, and I'll say that if you're after a good-looking shirt, the Daddy Shark shirt looks great. And you don't, it's just a little shark happy face on your front there. So cheap on Amazon. So if you like that color blue, I highly recommend it, because it was given to me as a gift, and I was like, and then I put it on. And I was like, hey, I look good in this.
Do they make it in tent size? That's the question.
They do.
Okay. I'll have to see if I can procure one. So as a final wrap up here, since we started with Metallica, we'll end with Metallica. What I will say is I did give a tease on this week's episode discussing my upcoming topic and getting into some satanic panic. And I can say in the course of discussing one of the 4 facets of my research there will be some discussion about attaching Metallica and Satanism in the course of the story.
Oh, I was anticipating perhaps Marilyn Manson. I was not anticipating
Manson
Metallica.
gets there as well, but yes, Metallica plays a heavier. I'm not spoiling anything because I already teased this when we were talking about conceptualizing this in the first place. But in the course of the trial of the West Memphis 3, the fact that Metallica was a band that was greatly appreciated there, and Metallica, their music is actually used in the documentary that runs through, that kind of follows along, which brought a lot of the attention to the trial itself and the situation.
That's so funny, because I guess, but maybe it's just time has worn out that stuff, but Metallica seems so like lame to be to think of like devil worship or Satan or any of that stuff. I just wouldn't put that with Metallica, especially talking about the Metallica machine, right?
Exactly.
And thinking of this like monolithic, almost corporation style thing, to be like, that's what we're talking about.
There's other more obvious suspects that you could point a finger at. Like if you see Iron Maiden and you go like, okay, the iconography alone, or Judas Priest or any of the others, where you're like, all right.
And Marilyn Manson's like aesthetic with the eye and all this, sort of thing. And even his like current, demeanor and when you listen to interviews and stuff like that, you can kind of see that. Whereas like, Lars is like a short little tennis playing, like, liberal guy like from Denmark or whatever, and like James is like a redneck.
I mean, that's also kind of you knowing the personalities and being a fan of the band. To someone who just sees them on a poster, it was back in the day, four guys with long hair with a bunch of black behind them.
Well, that's
and
what I was saying. Is time has worn that out. Just like, because now I just like, really, the redneck guy that's like smoking a cigar there, that's the guy you think is like
But
Satan.
it's funny, like, even, as we get into the panic and that whole epidemic, wearing a black t-shirt with a band logo on it is sufficient enough to get folks to start casting aspersions at you, because if we're sort of having this us versus them mentality, where people are being ostracized or seen as other if they're not conforming to a more conservative bend.
Well, and it makes
really
sense.
easy.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess I shouldn't be shocked at Metallica, because I mean, like, for the longest time, people thought like KISS stood for like kids in Satan's service.
Or Knights in Satan's service, yes.
Oh, yeah, Knights, yeah.
Yeah, they go crazy with a lot of that stuff. We'll get into it on the show. There's
like,
plenty of this stuff that filters
KISS,
into
though,
it.
like Love Gun, and it's like,
but
that's...
again, when you've got Eugene Simmons, who calls himself the demon, who's lulling blood out of his mouth, and all of the other, like, they played into it as much as they could as well. But fascinating stuff, really interesting facet of the panic that we didn't get into. So interesting conversations will abound when we get there. So there's a tease for you. Join in once we get through Michael's glorious slap fight revolution. But thank you all for being here. We sincerely appreciate it. And Doc, I'm going to give you the opportunity to gesticulate and make recommendations if you're inclined.
Oh, smash that like button, hit subscribe, ring the bell.
See, you knocked that thing out on the first pass. Now, you didn't say, engage and,
Oh, set phasers to engage, or whatever he says, yeah.
Perfect. Right out of the box. And he'd been doing this for hundreds of episodes and still can't get through an intro. But in any event, we appreciate you being here. Please engage actively. We've got new shows winging your way here every Fantastic Friday, and you will not miss them if you've subscribed and turned your notifications on. Hang out with us there. And if you're interested in seeing more of this and you haven't encountered us before, we have a podcast, of course, and new episodes wing your way every lovely Monday morning on your preferred podcast provider app. So go scope us out there. Like, subscribe, rate, and review. We'd love to hear from you as always. And I will yet again remind you that this podcast is sponsored in part by the good folks at Old Spice and their glorious deodorant. They are keeping our pits lovely and clear since, 2 days ago for me, but the other boys died hard, dedicated and in the wool there.
Yes, sir. I could not do without my Old Spice, and
nor should you. And I'm not going to whistle on this one. We'll leave it alone for this. But in any event, there is a link tree in the show notes below that'll also take you to all of our relevant socials if you want to follow us there, see all of the glorious nonsense in the archives, and maybe I'll start doing Old Spice advertisements back on Instagram.
Are you going to go shirtless on a horse?
I'm not sure whether or not they will allow me to show that many rolls outside of a bakery. I'm not going to look like Putin, astride a glorious stallion or anything. But maybe on the OnlyFans, you can go check me up.
Also in the link tree below.
Indeed. My God, like the volume of shoulder, since we just talked about this for last week's episode, like the volume of shoulder hair people would have to deal with. If you want to watch like a chia pet on top of a horse, this is basically me with my shirt off. You don't want to watch that. But all right, I think that's going to officially put the nail in the coffin. I will not throw the random, unless you remember your name this week.
Oh, Leroy Cherry?
You are officially Leroy Cherry. All right, well, I guess that kind of lets the cat out of the bag. So, for Disinformed After Dark this week, I am, in fact, Kenton Eldorado.
And I'm Leroy Cherry.
And I'll let you say it.
Zippity zoop, we're out of here. No,